welcome to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm your host, Brooke Grimsley. This week, we're talking to my co-host on the opening drive, Randy Karraker, about the Cardinals' offseason approach. Well, as if I don't see you enough, Randy, it's so nice for you to join me today. There's a lot to talk about, specifically with the Cardinals. This is such an important offseason. But, Randy, you've been a lifelong Cardinals fan and also covering them professionally for 40 years. This past season, a 91-loss season for the Cardinals, was it one of the worst that you've ever experienced?
It was, for a couple of reasons. When I was growing up in the 70s, the Cardinals just weren't good, and I got used to them losing. But since Whitey Herzog came in 1980, we've pretty much expected the Cardinals to be good. And when they weren't good, there was a good reason. Jack Clark getting hurt in 1990 or 1986. When they were bad in 1990, all the players were going to be free agents, and they were disgruntled, and Whitey Herzog quit. But for a team that I had expectations for to disintegrate so much really was disheartening. And it's not just the fact that they had the injuries that they had, but from a defensive standpoint, they weren't good. We certainly didn't see the progression of all of the young players like we had hoped. And to lose 91 games and pretty much be out of it by the middle of May at 10-24. Yeah, it was one of the worst years for Cardinal baseball in my lifetime.
And I know that the season started out in a unique way because you had the World Baseball Classic, but we've discussed this a lot during our show in the mornings, the opening drive, that we don't think personally that is an excuse for what we saw this season. Do you think that this season was a fluke factoring in the World Baseball Classic, or do you think that there was more that happened that led up to this point?
I think there was more that happened. And one of the things that does happen when you have a manager that really stresses the fundamentals like Mike Shildt did, and you have a guy like Skip Schumacher who left, no fault of the Cardinals that Skip Schumacher left, but you have people that are really good coaches that left, and I saw a disintegration of the fundamentals, whether it was defensively or on the base paths. They just weren't as good as they had been in previous years. Sure, there is something to be said for the WBC and Wilson Contreras not getting an opportunity to know your veteran pitchers, but if that's the case, then shame on Waino and Michaelis, right? Those were the guys. And other teams had to deal with the WBC too. So I can't put everything on the WBC. I know the Cardinals like to look for excuses. Unfortunately, I don't think that this was a one-off. I think the Cardinals need to make some pretty dramatic changes, and I don't know that they're going to if they want to get back to what they and what we expect.
One of the big issues this season was starting pitching, and now because it was a big issue this season, you have to address it this offseason. There's so many different ways that the Cardinals could approach it. I'm going to start with first, how do you wish the Cardinals would approach the offseason when it comes to getting starting pitching?
Well, the first thing I would do is what has worked for the Cardinals in the past, and that's make a trade. And they have an abundance of young hitters. Hitters are scarce in this free agent and trade market, and the Cardinals have people that are attractive to other teams. And if I could go get a number 1 or 2 pitcher with one of the young bats that I have, and Nolan Gorman is the one that seems to fit. He's a DH. He's probably at best an average defensive second baseman. And teams around baseball love him. And he could become Kyle Schwarber. He could wind up being an awesome hitter, and we could really be lamenting this for a long time. But I would go out and try to get a guy like that. I don't know that it's realistic for the Cardinals at this stage to think about getting one of the top pitchers. I don't put Sonny Gray. A lot of people do, and that's fine, but I don't put Sonny Gray in the classification as a front of the rotation, a number 1 guy. But a Nola, even a Blake Snell, who only gives you 5 1/3, 5 2/3 innings per start, I don't see the Cardinals being in that class. Cardinals were really hurt, by the way, by the arrest of Julio Urias from the Dodgers, a left-hander, and the injury to Shohei Ohtani, because all of a sudden a guy like Aaron Nola, who was the number 3 starter, becomes the number 1, and there will be real competition for him. I don't think it's realistic to think that the Cardinals are going to be able to get one of those top 3 starters on the free agent market. I just don't think financially that they're able to do it.
Which plays into my second question. What do you think the Cardinals will do this offseason?
I think it'll probably be a Sonny Gray type, and I know Katie Wu mentioned that last week on this very show. I would think that they'll probably go get a Sonny Gray, and then a lesser arm in free agency. I don't know at the end of the day if the Cardinals have it in them to trade one of their young bats because of the fear of what they saw in the All-Star game with the Rosarena and Garcia, or what they saw in the ALCS with Garcia winding up being the ALCS MVP, and he would have been the World Series MVP if he would have kept playing. I don't think the Cardinals can stomach that, seeing another one of their former players becoming a superstar in Major League Baseball.
Which is what you worry about with the trades. I think that's something that a lot of people have concerns with right now is the comments that John Mozeliak made at the trade deadline that they were going to go out and get 3 starters. Now, to be fair, he didn't say what type of starters he was going to get, and maybe we should have followed up a little bit better with that. But now it looks more in line with that he'll get 2.5 starters, that half being a swing man. Is that the Cardinals and John Mozeliak walking back on their statements? Do you have any trouble with that?
I think it is, and his explanation, and I do have trouble with it. His explanation is, well, we didn't know what Zach Thompson was going to do down the stretch when I said that we needed 3 starters. Well, Zach Thompson was a number 1 draft choice. You evaluated him as a really talented guy. You told him he was going to be your number 1 lefty out of the bullpen, so you knew he had talent. You should have had an idea by then. It's your fault if you didn't know what Zach Thompson was capable of. But he did what he did in the second half. Would I count on him because he did it for 6 weeks, for 6 months? I wouldn't count on him if I were the Cardinals. I would be in the market for 2 guys that are horses, 2 guys that can give you 180 innings. And I don't like where the Cardinals are starting. Miles Mikolas is what he is. He's a 3 or a 4. We thought he was a 2. He's a 3 or a 4. And hopefully he'll bounce back and be what he was in his first year with the Cardinals. Steven Matz hasn't shown an ability to stay healthy for the Cardinals. What's the most important ability? Availability. Mm-hmm. You have to assume that he's going to get hurt because that's all you've seen from Steven Matz. And then Thompson, you just don't know. Liberatore, you just don't know. Gordon Graceffo, you just don't know. Michael McGreevy, you just don't know. I would still, if I were them, I would want to go get 3 guys that are capable of throwing 180 innings that have done it in the last couple of years.
And the payroll is going to be a big factor in that. And that's been a big discussion. I discussed it with Katie last week. And it sounds like that they're going to be leaning towards that $200 million, what they were kind of hoping to get up prior to the trade deadline last season. I think when fans heard that, Randy, and you saw in the reaction, they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. This was a different season. We should have a different approach this offseason. What did you think of that, of kind of that payroll expectation that they put out there?
Well, I get that they didn't have as many fans and they don't anticipate as many fans in 24 as they had. And that's going to be where their drop off in revenue is. I think at some point, though, nobody knows what the Cardinal profits are. But I think at some point, they're going to have to come to grips with what the rest of baseball is. Even though the Padres had to take out a $50 million loan to cover payroll, their payroll is enormous. The Mets' payroll is enormous. And what happens is when the Padres are giving Yu Darvish his contract, or the Mets are signing $43.5 million a year deals for people like Scherzer and Justin Verlander, well, the price of everybody goes up. And you just can't stay where you were in 2017 in 2024. It just doesn't work that way. You have to go with the cost of doing business. And I still don't know if the Cardinals have come to grips with that they don't set the market. The rest of the teams do, and the agents do. And the Cardinals, they're going to have to make less money for themselves, unfortunately, for them, if they want to have a competitive team. And it's really important for them to have a competitive team because not only do they want to make money off of ticket sales and concessions, but even though Ballpark Village isn't technically a baseball property, they own it with Cordish Corporation, but how do they get people into Ballpark Village? It's by winning baseball games. So their other business is directly affected by the baseball business.
And spending money is everything that everybody wants to see this offseason. As you mentioned there, it's going to have to take the Cardinals being willing to spend money. But even if you do go spend out a lot of money, it is on the player to decide if they want to come here to St. Louis. Do you think there's any concerns about St. Louis right now? Because we know it's baseball heaven, right?
Yeah,
we
right.
know the history here. That's always attractive. But as of right now, with what you just had happen last season, is it still an attractive place to come to at this moment?
I think from the standpoint of some players, it will be. If I'm Aaron Nola, though, and the Braves are offering me money and the Cardinals are offering money, like I said, I would go to Atlanta if I were him because they have a better chance to win a World Series. If you're just in it right now for the money, or if you already have a ring, maybe St. Louis is attractive to you. But if you're looking at it and you really don't know in depth what's happened, and you see what happened early last season with O'Neill and with Contreras, you think, man, that's a mess there if you're another player. Now, you might have to go and talk to somebody that you know there who will tell you, no, it really wasn't as bad as it looked on the outside. But there are going to be players and agents who believe that this is not a great situation to be in. And ultimately, the reason that the Cardinals were able to get players for less money back in the 2000 to 2010 and even beyond that range is because players would come here and play less to win. Mark McGwire did, Jim Edmonds did, Darryl Kyle did, Edgar Renteria did, Matt Holliday ultimately did. There were a lot of players that came here with the idea that, okay, I've made my money, now I want to go win a World Series. And most of the time they did. But now, how can you predict that the Cardinals are going to win a World Series? They just came off a 91-loss season. They don't have players on their roster or coaches on their staff, aside from Willie McGee, that have won a World Series. So I don't know how you sell the Cardinals to a free agent and say, yeah, we're great and we're going to win a World Series. I think there are other franchises that have a much better argument to make than the Cardinals do.
And I know that you're really big on that experience matters, especially in the dugout. Is that something that you noticed with the teams, especially the Rangers winning the World Series? That was a lot of experience in the dugout.
A ton. And Bruce Bochy put together a really experienced coaching staff and had a really nice blend, by the way, of youth and experience. But Dusty Baker had the same thing in Houston when they won. Brian Snitker had the same thing in Atlanta when they won. And it looks like baseball's kind of going back to that experience matters thought process that they've pretty much had forever until, like, the Cardinals hired Mike Matheny with no managerial experience. It's been proven time and time and time again that experience in the dugout does matter. And not only do the Cardinals not have a ton of experience in their manager, in Olimar, but the only guy with any real substantial major league experience as a player or as a coach on their staff is Willie McGee. And you look around and you see Ron Washington just left Atlanta to become the manager of the Angels, and he takes Eric Young Sr. with him. But they still have Kevin Seitzer on that staff, and they still have Rick Kranitz on that staff. And as we mentioned, Bochy's staff is really experienced. And those are the teams that year after year are winning. And I don't know why this isn't a Cardinal thing. I don't know why the rest of baseball can't look at that and say, hey, that's how it's done, because it's been that way forever.
We have more coming up with Randy Karraker here on the 101 on Sports. Coming up next, we're going to discuss more of the Cardinals' pitching woes and the coaching staff. That's next here on Fox 2. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm your host, Brooke Grimsley. We go back to our discussion now with my co-host of the opening drive, Randy Karraker, as we discuss more of the Cardinals' pitching woes from this past season, and we talk about the Cardinals' coaching staff. Does coaching really matter? Because it's on the players to go execute. It's on them to perform. But as you mentioned at the beginning, you've been able to witness a lot of great managers and coaches. In your experience, and just from memory, when's a time that you could point to that say this is when coaching mattered?
Well, just recently. When Mike Schilt took over the Cardinals, they were the worst base running team in baseball and the worst fielding team in baseball. They were worst. And they went from worst to first in a year under Mike Schilt. Same thing happened with the Cardinals when Whitey Herzog took over in 1980. They were one of the worst fundamental teams in all of baseball. And Whitey drilled it in. He enlisted the help of George Kissel, who was with the Cardinal organization forever. And, oh, by the way, Mike Schilt is a George Kissel disciple. And the Cardinals went from being one of the worst base running and fielding teams to one of the best. Tony La Russa emphasized it all the time. And at the end of the Joe Torre era here in St. Louis, and Torre, by the way, was just as good as those guys, but he didn't have the horses. The brewery had checked out when Joe Torre was the manager here. But Tony comes in and brings in a lot of guys from Oakland who knew what he was doing, emphasizes the fundamentals. And the Cardinals, even in their bad years under Tony, were always a pretty good fundamental team. There's a direct correlation. We saw it with Texas this year. Last year, Texas 2022 was a bottom half base running and defensive team. This year, top 10 base running and fielding team because of the presence of Bruce Bochy.
Now, when it comes to the coaching staff, John Mozeliak mentioned prior to the season ending that there would probably be a natural churn when it comes to the coaching staff. But so far, Randy, there's been no churn whatsoever. Are you surprised that there haven't been any changes made to the coaching staff?
I'm not surprised that they have stuck with this group of coaches because they seem to have really latched onto them. But I am surprised to this point that the Cardinals haven't added to this staff for the very reason we were just talking about. There are people people accessible to the Cardinals that have experience that they could put in the dugout. Yadier Molina is the most notable, as Martin Kilcoyne noted on Fox 2. The Cardinals have been talking to him, and I don't know if they'll be able to work out a deal. Chris Carpenter was in their employ. He still comes back. He's a Red Jacket guy. Came back for Adam Wainwright's ceremony, was here for the Cardinals Hall of Fame induction. He still loves the Cardinals, and he's doing a great job in getting young pitchers ready with the Angels. It seems like it would be advantageous to help out Ollie and the other coaches, in addition to the players, by bringing in some experienced coaches. And I just bring up those two names because they're familiar and they've been coaches in the Cardinal. Well, Yadi was basically everything, and Carp was a coach in the Cardinal organization. But there are plenty of experienced people out there that I think would lend a level of mentorship to a young staff that it really doesn't enjoy right now.
If Yadier Molina does come back and is a part of the Cardinals dugout this coming season, what big of a difference do you think he will make?
Well, I go back to what Hall of Famer Ted Simmons said when he said that Yadi was his favorite catcher. And Ted Simmons said, Yadi can be your catcher, your pitching coach, your hitting coach, and your manager all at the same time. Well, not catcher anymore. But if Olimar wants a sounding board, he could have that sort of an impact. If Wilson Contreras needs help formulating or being helped with a game plan, or Dusty Blake or Dusty Rhodes or Dusty Springfield, whatever. If that guy needs help in formulating a game plan on a day-to-day basis against opposing hitters, I think that Yadier Molina would be great for that. If Yadi became a guy who hit 208 in his second year in baseball, second full year, wound up as a guy with 2,500 hits and became, or 2,000 hits, and became a 300 hitter, he can help hitters get better. There isn't a facet of this game, working with the manager, pitching coach, pitchers, hitting coach, hitters, where Yadier Molina would not help the group. I think that's the sort of impact that he could have. And I know that it's been talked about the time commitment that he would be willing to give. But if you have access to Yadier Molina, you say, okay, just show up when the players show up, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, help them out, stay for the game, be the sounding board for the manager. And then if you want to leave, leave. He doesn't need to stick around and fill out reports or get on the computer. He can just be a baseball guy. And I think he's that valuable. I know other coaches might not like it, but to me, a guy like Yadier Molina would be that valuable to a team to have him on his terms.
And he's made it clear, because he's done interviews as well leading up to this, that he wants to be a manager. He wants to be a part of an organization. So that would be huge for the Cardinals to bring him in. Now, a lot of people, though, are curious what that dynamic would look like with Olimar.
Well, I think Ollie has a great deal of respect. I know Ollie has a great deal of respect for Yadi, and Yadi for Ollie. They're friends. Ollie Marmol, despite being a young manager, has been in the Cardinal organization for a long, long time, and he and Yadi are familiar with each other. And I would go back to what I talked about just in terms of it being a sounding board. Now, if there's something, if I'm Ollie Marmol and I'm in the dugout and there's a move that I think we should make and Yadi disagrees with me, I think I would defer. I think I would say, okay, well, this is the guy that's been in 4 World Series and won a couple of them and has seen pretty much every situation. Yadi's seen a whole lot more than Ollie has. So I think if I were in Ollie's situation and Yadi's there, he's not going to be the bench coach, but if you're listening to him, defer. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then maybe you move on to the next situation the next time. But until it doesn't work with Yadi, I think I would be inclined to listen. And that's another thing that all the Cardinal managers did, whether it was Tony or Mike Matheny or Mike Schilt. They would ask Yadi what he thought of how a pitcher was doing and then listen to him rather than trusting the pitcher, which makes sense. Hey, does he have anything left? Nope, get him out of here. And Yadi was always very honest about that. So I think that he could be an incredibly valuable resource, and I think there is mutual respect there.
We have much more coming up with Randy Karraker after the break, including what he would consider a successful offseason for the Cardinals and what would be considered a not successful offseason. That's coming up next here on Fox 2. Welcome back to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm your host, Brooke Grimsley. We go back to our discussion now with my co-host of the opening drive, Randy Karraker, as we discuss what would be considered a successful offseason for the Cardinals. And as you mentioned earlier, this season you don't believe was a fluke. So when it comes to the Cardinals' approach to this offseason, how big of a sense of urgency that you need to have, one, to make sure that the fans are still engaged and understanding that they're doing the best that they can, but two, because you have City SC in town. And we saw this summer a lot of fans really enjoying City SC and the energy that they brought here to St. Louis.
And especially young fans. And St. Louis is a city where kids learn from their grandparents and their parents how to score a baseball game. From everything I heard from people with young kids this summer, it was all about City SC. They all wanted to wear the City Red. They all wanted to watch the games on Apple TV. They all wanted to be around City Park because the soccer was exciting, and it wasn't just the games, but the crowd was so energetic, and it was just different, obviously, than this year's baseball crowd. So I think that's something that the Cardinals need to take note of. They have to win, and I think what they need to do, Brooke, is Carrie Davis, our co-host, talked about it almost all year long on the opening drive. Is they have a setup now where they want to play Tommy Edman in center. Well, play Newt Barr in left, play Edman in center, play Walker in right every day. Arenado, Wynn, Brendan Donovan, Goldschmidt, and Contreras. There's your starting nine, and plug in your DH, whomever it might be. And don't try to be like the Dodgers, and don't try to reinvent the wheel. Be like the Braves were. Mm-hmm. The Braves had 8 of their starting players, 8 of their 9 starters were on the diamond for at least 139 games. The only ones who weren't were the 2 catchers. Get that guys out there, give them a role, let them get comfortable in their position, and let them play. And then same thing goes with the pitching staff. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. I don't know how the Cardinals switched on a dime to go from a contact staff to a strikeout staff, but they have. But develop a philosophy that goes throughout the organization and implement that philosophy, and allow Olimar to talk to the minor league coaches and say, okay, here's the way I need a player to be trained by the time I get him to the major league level. Before they start spring training, whether it's here at the winter warm-up or down in Florida, the entire group, major league staff, minor league staff, should be in a conference room around giant tables, and Olimar should be able to spout a Cardinal way that he envisions.
Last question for you. What do you think, in your personal opinion, would be a successful offseason for the Cardinals, and what would not be?
Okay. To me, a successful offseason includes getting 2 starters that you consider front of the rotation. I'm going to say 1, 2, or 3 guys. And that would be overpaying for Aaron Nola. If it's true that Aaron Nola is looking for the Max Scherzer 2015 contract, 210 over 30. Howard Eskin of WIP in Philadelphia said that was it. If I'm the Cardinals, I'm all over that. $30 million a year for 7 years. And then go make a trade. And I know that you're going to make a trade. If you're going to get something that you want, like a number 1 starter like Dylan Cease, you're going to have to give up something you don't want to give up, like a Nolan Gorman. But you win by pitching. And so that would be a successful start for me. And then I would try to sign a mid or lower level, maybe a reclamation project 3rd starter. An unsuccessful season would be coming back with Sonny Gray as your addition. And if you have a staff where you're starting Sonny Gray on opening day and it's Gray, Michaelis, Matz, Zach Thompson, Liberatore, that's a patently unsuccessful offseason. And, oh, by the way, the Cardinals need to get at least 1 or 2 relief pitchers, too, because the bullpen was the biggest problem last year. Now, they have a lot of good young arms that they got in their trades and that they have coming up through their system that are going to be solid. But you need at least a couple of veterans down there.
All right. Thank you so much, Randy.
Always good to see you. And you can obviously, I see her every morning at 7 o'clock on 101 ESPN.
Bright and early. Thank you so much to Randy Karraker. And be sure to check out our show, The Opening Drive, on 101 ESPN, Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next Sunday for another episode of the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2.